this is going to be a little bit longer answer. How are we supposed to interpret signs in the heavens? And it starts with Genesis 1:14. It says, God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the night, day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. So God put them there for us, but how are we to know the meaning behind these things? For instance, do all blood moons have the same meaning? Do all eclipses, et cetera, go down the list? What's a good way to interpret these
signs? Okay, lots of people are into signs in the heavens, and you mentioned blood moons. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're talking about some of these astronomical events is that these are standard. They happen all the time. And so people who aren't into astronomy don't actually consider this when they're looking at some of the things that you see on prophecy pages and that kind of stuff. Anything that you're getting on off of the internet, by the way, you have to watch out for clickbait. And so lots of people want to make big deals out of things that are just common occurrences. In ancient times, when you're talking about eclipses, that kind of thing, people would obviously freak out over that type of situation. Comets were usually considered to be something that was an omen of ill will, and kind of a disaster bringer, and that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that God can't use these things in that kind of context. I'm just saying that unless he has said that he is using it in that kind of context, it's dangerous to try to put words in God's mouth. And so, for example, when you're talking about lunar eclipses, that's what a blood moon is. Basically what's happening is the moon is traveling into the shadow of the earth. That usually happens at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. And it always happens on a full moon. And another thing that you have is a number of the feast days occur on full moons. And they're always on full moon. So, for example, Passover is always on a full moon. And the reason it is because they have a lunar calendar and their month starts with a new moon. And so the middle of the month is going to be a full moon. And then it wanes and goes back to a new moon. And so the fact that there, for example, you have 12 full moons in a calendar year, and if you have 2 lunar eclipses in a calendar year, there's a 1 in 6 chance that Passover is going to have a lunar eclipse. Follow? Okay. And so at that point, there's the odds. And so when they did this whole thing with the blood moons back in, I believe it was 2016, Jesus was coming back on a blood moon and stuff. When they did these things, they were talking about major events taking place on feast days where there was a blood moon. And so one of the things that I did was I've got astronomy programs because I have telescopes, and so I like to look at the stars. And so I've got astronomy programs, and so I went back and checked them out. So I went to check out and see if their dates were actually correct, and they weren't. Some of them were close, but they weren't correct. And I wanted to see where the lunar eclipse was. And one of the things you got to understand about a lunar eclipse is that there's only certain places on the earth that you're going to be able to see them. And so if there's a lunar eclipse on a feast day and the only people who can see them are people who are in the middle of the South Pacific, where there's almost no one, I have a hard time having that be some kind of radical sign that God's at work in some kind of arena. Now, if it was always something that was seen in Jerusalem, that's another animal altogether. And so at that point, I'd be paying more close attention. And so there are, the Bible talks about, Jesus talked about the fact that there were going to be signs in the heavens. And so in the book of Luke, there's a passage where Jesus specifically warns about signs in the heavens. And he says, this is in Luke chapter 21, And it says, and there will be signs, verse 25, in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear in the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And so, obviously, there are signs that are going to be in the heavens. Well, when you get to the book of Revelation, you have, when you get to Revelation chapter 8, you have something the size of a mountain that's falling out of the heavens and hitting the ocean. It's burning. And that looks like either a cometary impact or an asteroidal impact on the earth. There's another body that comes down, and it's called wormwood in the passage, and it looks like it's what's called a bolide. It's another cosmic body, and most likely it would be an asteroid of some kind that's not as compact as the previous one, and when it hits the atmosphere, it just explodes, and it ends up poisoning the waters. And so those are signs in the heavens. And so if I saw that, something that's the size of a mountain hit in the ocean, and then a third of the ships are destroyed, there you go. That's a biblical sign. And if you have another bolide, another body that comes down and it explodes and it poisons a third of the waters, that's a sign. And so again, there you go. Another sign that you have is that the moon is going to turn to blood, and this is where people get into the whole blood moon thing, and the sun's going to turn black as sackcloth of hair. And so that is another specific sign that the Bible gives, that Jesus gives, that is going to take place before the second coming, and in fact, right before the second coming. That, by the way, is a sign that you can't see now, like ever, right now. There's because when you're talking about the sun turning black, you are talking about an eclipse. If you're using cosmic bodies, celestial bodies to do this, you are talking about something getting in the way of the sun, but it can't be the moon. And so it's not an eclipse of the moon, because the moon has turned red. And so the moon still has light hitting it. And if it's a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, the moon goes in front of the sun. And so you're talking about something that's totally different in that situation than anything that we've got going on right now. And so the moon would be in an area where it would be getting some of the light that's coming from the sun, most likely from around the body that is in front of the sun, and the earth itself would be in shadow. And so that means something going through the solar system. And so again, signs in the heavens at that point. It talks about the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And so there is a situation where you have hailstones coming down. And usually when we think of hailstones, we're thinking of ice. The wording in Greek is not confined to ice. And so it could be a meteor shower coming down. It talks about 100-pound hailstones, basically. Hailstones that's a talent weight, anywhere from 75 to 125 pounds hitting the earth. And so again, signs in the heavens at that point. And so again, you can see some of these. There's some in the Old Testament. The sun stopped in the heavens during the time of Joshua. That's a sign. The sun retreated in the heavens during the time of Hezekiah. That's another sign. And so you have these things routinely, but in each one of those cases, you guys, the Bible prophet predicted these things. Specifically, the Lord let us know that these things were going to come to pass. And so with the blood moon thing, didn't happen. And so
how about
lousy prophet.
The sun being darkened? Could that be like an atmospheric thing too, where you have a bunch of dust thrown up from some kind of explosion where?
And why isn't the moon black?
So it wouldn't just be reddish. I'm asking a question.
Well,
I don't know.
If you're talking about the illumination of the sun versus the moon,
yeah.
The moon is a reflection of the sun. And so if atmospheric obstruction is dark enough to put out the sun, it would definitely put out the moon. And so and I'm not saying that can't be, some of the signs in the heavens. Obviously, you have if you
You
have
think
an
those coincide though? You're saying that because of the way it's phrased there, and
They
the blood
coincide.
moon is happening at the same time as the.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they coincide is what it looks like. And again, when you're talking about some of the things that you have in the book of Revelation, if that's what it's talking about, an asteroidal impact, then what's going to happen is there literally, you got something that's big enough to make a wave that's going to take out a third of shipping in an ocean. You are talking about something that's massive, and it's going to be throwing major amounts of dust into the air. Well, it's going to throw a mantle into the air. At the very same time, a third of the trees are burned up and all the green grass is burned up. Well, that would be from the impact, actually. You would have Earth crust going up into the atmosphere and raining down on the areas around the Earth, and that would start massive fires and things like that. So it's when you go through the New Testament, you look at it's not just the New Testament; it's the Old Testament too, talking about the same times. Major catastrophes are going to be taking place during the tribulation period. So.